Good evening, and thank you all for joining us in person and also by Zoom. I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens, and I have to say this since we're on Zoom, in Washington, D.C. Those of us who are here already know that. We are so pleased to have audiences joining us both here and on Zoom so that we can reach so many more people. We've had so much interest in all of these programs, but especially tonight's program. For those of you in the theater, I think you know what I'm going to say now. Make sure all those devices are turned off so that you aren't the one that's making all the noise later. For those of you at home, you can submit questions via the Q&A function, and we will get to as many as we can, both here in the theater and by Zoom at the end of the talk. I hope many of you have had a chance to see the exhibition Setting Sail, The Story of Sea Cloud. Fabulous. If you haven't already, you really need to plan to see this wonderful exhibition that is about the many lives of the famed yacht, which was, of course, built by Marjorie Post. And she loved sailing on it. She loved entertaining friends. Of course, she loved entertaining royalty and her family. It also, of course, had a stint in the Coast Guard during World War II, where it was the first integrated ship leading to the full integration of all branches of the U.S. military. So it has quite a distinguished and important history. And now, of course, the Sea Cloud lives on as a luxury cruise liner, so you may actually go on the Sea Cloud as well. Now, the exhibition lecture series about the Sea Cloud begins on March 6th. So be sure to visit our website and then pick up your tickets. Our 4-part Great Homes and Gardens lecture continues next weekend next week, not weekend, with Nicole Juday, and she will explore the fabulous private gardens of homes in Philadelphia. And we've also rescheduled last week's Snowed Out lecture by Hilton Carter for March 20th. So there are limited virtual tickets still available for the other lectures, so be sure to register soon. Tonight, I know we are all very excited to hear from Josh Young, who will explore his approach to design through the lens of his book, Artful Home. I hope you'll join us after the lecture for a book signing just outside the door here. And Artful Home, as I'm sure you all also know, is available for purchase upstairs in the museum shop. Now, before I hand the microphone over, I wanted to share a bit about Josh. He is an artist, an author, and a designer. He's based right here in Washington, D.C. He's a graduate of Italy's renowned Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Milan. And Josh and his work have appeared everywhere in Architectural Digest. Do you have a minute here? Architectural Digest, Elle Decor, Vogue Italia, GQ Italia, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, House Beautiful, House and Garden, and Lonnie. Got all that? Josh's first book, Artful Home, was published by Rizzoli just last September. He's worked and collaborated with brands such as Framebridge, Jo Malone London, Visual Comfort, and Farrow and Ball. His design debut with Williams-Sonoma Home, consisting of a multi-year product collaboration, launched last October. Now please join me in welcoming Josh Young to the podium.
Thank you all so much for coming out. I appreciate you braving the cold weather here in DC. A special thank you to Hillwood for hosting us, and specifically Katie McCarthy, who had reached out and proposed this opportunity. We've been on, this is my assistant, Susanna. She's kind of my emotional support human.
Many roles.
She takes care of me. But her and I have actually been on this really cool book tour since September. We did 20 stops, and it's been really fun. And what's really cool is this is our last stop on the tour. It's here in DC. And at many of these signings, you know, I get to meet a lot of fun individuals. I signed the book, but I never really get to like go in depth with what it is that I wrote. So I thought this would be such a cool opportunity for us to tackle. She's up here because in practicing the lecture, I felt kind of stiff, and I was one that like always fell asleep in class, and I'm like, I don't want to be that person. So she knows me better than most. She knows my work very closely, so I wanted this to be more of like a dialogue as we go through the different slides. But a little bit about me, kind of like the Spark Notes version. I was born in a small town in Pennsylvania to a family of really talented athletes, although I was not talented myself. Got the height, but I was not talented. But I always gravitated to art. It was my thing. Truly, since I was like a kid, I was always painting and drawing in my room. My family was kind enough and supportive enough to build my first studio when I was 13, and that became my recluse. When most of the kids that I was hanging out with were interested in the latest video game or action figure, I was like that nerd going to the library, taking out books on Cezanne and Twombly, truly at like 13, and studying their techniques and trying to apply that to my own. And it just became, in so many ways, like the foundation of who I am today. And that interest in art kind of followed throughout my grade school years. And at 19, I did a crazy thing. I won't bore you, but I moved to Milan for a boy. It did not end in an Italian romance, but silver lining is I got to live for 6 years in one of the most amazing cities. If you've been fortunate enough to visit, it's truly a city that is centered around fashion, art, culture, and in so many ways, if you're familiar with my work, you know, it's a city that the old world and the new world kind of collide, and I've always tried to have that showcased in my work, both on and off the canvas. In 2015, I moved back to the States, and I did a lot of job hopping. Corporate, creative, just really never finding my footing though. I was completely lost. And in 2017, my husband and I were living in Chicago, and I was laid off probably, I think it was like the 6th time I was fired. New collections, and it just became mundane, and that's why I you know, and I'm kind of going into this period again with something else, but I just felt like I needed a different creative outlet to kind of distract me. You know, and again, we'll talk about it, but the book itself, it was really important to me, especially when I was talking to the publishers. Like, I did not want to create just a monograph, right? I didn't want to just do a portfolio. It was important for me to kind of explain my process for people that, you know, were reading the book to be able to take something from it. I didn't want it to be too literal of a how-to, but if you read it, you truly, I would hope, I've heard, that you're able to get a sense of how you can apply that to your own home or to your own work if you're an artist yourself. So, and here we are, we got it, cool. Me.
But he is going to go through the highlights of each chapter of the book and how he's broken those down, which I think a lot of people will be able to apply, like, no matter what your field is or if you're a creative or not. My background is not creative, but I've learned so much from him and from the book and just hearing him speak about it and reading his words. So hopefully everyone will glean a little bit from each section.
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
You said that you opened your design studio and your business just exploded exponentially. How did that happen?
I mean, I think a lot of it was luck, and I think a lot of it was timing too. Like I said, I'm able to now kind of look back at it, but in 2017, I mean, I don't know how many of you like remember old Instagram, right? But it was not like a shoppable thing. Like that whole concept of like releasing a collection if you were an art, like that was so new at the time. And you would do a sale solely through like a DM or an email, right? I think it was just being of my generation, like understanding what that tool was and how to apply that and use that. Again, like being in full control of that messaging. One thing I've never done, people are always like, really? I've actually never worked with a gallery. I just never needed to, right? Because a gallery is going to take 50% of my commission, and they're also going to be in control of like who it goes to, how it's talked about. I'm in full control of that. And that's actually for me has been such a beautiful thing about social media. And I think that can apply not only just to an artist, I think any person who is a creative, and no matter what the medium is, right? Like that's just the beauty of it.
So did you already have lots and lots of followers? Like,
No, when I started, I think I had like 500, and they were all friends. So they were like, you know, and it was a complete. If you scroll far enough down, which don't, but a lot of it's just like personal content. And then one day it just kind of like switched, and I remember my friends being like, "Is that you?" All right, I think we're good. So we'll start here.
We're not.
Don't worry, this will be great.
There we go. So this is,
Amazing.
just before we dive in, so this was my very first studio in Chicago. It was not much. It was probably 300 square feet, but it was mine, and it was a place where, again, it was like almost like going back to when I was 13, where I could create, and so much of what I do today kind of was started in this small little space. So the first chapter of the book, and the first kind of core element, is palette. So I was actually just curious, like, just by show of hands, how many of you would say, like, you know what your core palette is? And this could be applicable to, like, attire, to interiors. Good, great, don't need to be here. See you later. But that's great. I think, like, for me, so much of me identifying and understanding what my artistic and creative point of view was understanding what that foundational palette was. If you are familiar with my work, you know I love neutrals. And for me, like, a palette is what, so much of what it's rooted in is the emotions that it can conjure up. So if we're speaking about home, I love a sense of calm. I love a sense of tranquility. And I've always found success with that with the neutral palette, I should say. I'm not afraid of color, we'll go into that. But understanding that that was kind of like my starting point really helped me evolve both my interior aesthetic and also to my point of view working in the studio as well. Just a quick little vignette. So this is in the dining room of our townhouse here in Capitol Hill. And again, you'll see, I think a common misconception is that neutrals are boring or sterile, and that does not necessarily need to be true. I think for me, it's like leaning more into warmer tones of ivory and beige and tans and taupes, and the importance of layering them and how you can still conjure up a sense of warmth. So, you know, it's kind of like a debunked.
Mm-hmm. And I
myth.
certainly agree that white or neutral spaces can often feel cold and flat, but the way he uses his palette, not just a singular tone, and layers that throughout his home really does feel so warm. And he'll kind of go into how he's able to accomplish that as well.
And real quick too, just again, how it's applied then into my work on canvas. This is just a large scale abstract that I do. And many of my pieces, there's multiple layers. And like here, there's probably like 6 or 8 pigments and like unbleached titanium and parchment tones. And again, just the way that it's layered, it can still have a warmth to it, even though it's truly, when you strip it down, it's a pretty neutralized palette.
So one of the things we did in preparing for the lecture was polling Josh's Instagram following just to kind of see what people would ask if they could be in a lecture like this. Or plenty of people also message him asking him questions too. But one of the ones we got the most was, how do I approach color in my home and where do I start?
So I won't do this a lot, but I'm just curious, like, by show of hands, how many of you would classify yourself as someone who's afraid of color? Or color, like, oh, just one? Great. So, we'll talk. This was supposed to be like an audience thing, but I'll talk directly to you. So I would definitely fall into that category too, I think, right? But I think for me, where I found like a sweet spot, right? And I always say, like, I've always approached color almost like a neutral in its sense, and there's a spectrum. So whenever I'm dealing with a color, I'd really like for it to kind of be like the singular focus within a space, right? So the spectrum for me is like either adding a was that the Great Wall? Adding either a singular piece in a room, right, to really grab that attention, or I go to the completely other extreme where I completely color drench a room in a color and just add and play with like a tone on tone manner. But I do find, like, you know, there's so many talented, crazy talented designers who are able to successfully layer lots of different colors and a lot of different patterns, and they do it so successfully. But for me, again, going back to how palette really evokes like a certain type of emotion for me, that would overwhelm me. So my approach, again, this is a room at Sycamore House. So we have an old country property outside of Middleburg, and yellow's been a favorite color of mine since I was a kid. And I knew in the renovation process, I'm like, I want to dedicate one room to that palette. And this is more of like a buttery, warm cream tone. But again, I just completely color drenched the walls and the ceiling, and then just accentuating, you know, with textiles, whether it be different velvets or Belgian linens in that same tone, or adding in brass elements with the frames and the lamps. When you enter, you're automatically able to get a quick snapshot and a quick understanding of what the room is all about, palette-wise, without it being too overwhelming in your face. Sure, why not? Let's do it.
How do you test colors in your home before maybe purchasing something and
Yeah.
figuring out that did not work?
Yeah, that's actually, and you know what's funny? That process drives people crazy. That is like my jam. I love sampling stuff and like seeing it how it evolves throughout the day, seeing it in different lights. It's funny, we were doing a guest room at the townhouse, and I had her, we're looking at green. I'm like, I want you to put on that wall. I want you to put it there. I want to see it behind a curtain. I want to see it behind this frame. I want to
Different
see
lighting.
Yeah. Wait, what was the question?
How you choose a color.
This
so
is
like how
Parsons
you
here.
establish
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, like, again, I think it's, and we're gonna go into it. There's a photo that shows this, but for me, picking a color, especially if it's like going outside of what I define as like my core palette, I'm really conscious of how that color will flow into the other rooms. Again, I know so many different designers that are so great. Like you walk into the homes that they do, and every room has a different vibe, right? A different color, a different pattern, and they do it so beautifully. But for me, I love from the moment you walk into the front door to you leave and have gone through every room, you're seeing like a through line through everything. So even that yellow in that room, you'll find like very similar tone pillows up in one of the guest rooms, or in an accent lamp in the dining room. There's just that continuous pattern that you're able to like digest as you migrate through. Yeah, I hope that answers
Y'all
your question.
sampled a lot of
We sampled
shapes
a lot.
trying to
A lot.
find this one.
Continue to build with just a gut feeling of, oh, this complements that color.
100%.
Taking a risk usually, or?
Yeah, and again, I've always, I think my thing is specifically with picking out like paint colors, and again, this is applicable to the campus as well. I've always leaned more towards like warmth. So even like right now, like with picking greens, like I'm leaning towards greens that have like more like brown or red casts and undertones to it. So yeah.
Next. He also, and the way he was able to approach yellow, which for me is not a color I've been drawn to before. But walking into this room, it still feels very warm and soft. And kind of how he said, you see his basic palette of the neutrals and the lighter tones, and then injecting that yellow and using it in small areas throughout the space kind of brings it all together without feeling
Yeah, and yellow is
too much.
It's funny because like I know yellow's a polarizing color, and I knew that going into that, and I think that for me that's why I wanted to kind of do like a stripped down version of that while still again being able to feature that color. So this is what I was saying, like, so you know, Sycamore House is a federal style home, so the rooms are, it's almost like a domino effect. They lead one into the other. So here you're in the dining room, which looks into the main entrance, which then looks into the parlor floor living room, which is where you see that buttery color. It's called Dorset Cream. But I wanted this like ombre effect, right? So like I really wanted like a really warm off-white in the dining room, which led into a true cream, which then led into this buttery yellow. Again, as you just progress throughout the house, this occurs. And you know, again, the true testament was when we were laying out the images of the home with my book designer, everything just looked really like cohesive. And that's kind of like how I like to approach a project. Again, on the spectrum, like I said, sometimes I like adding just color as a singular piece within a room. This is a little reading nook in our primary bedroom in DC. Again, my love of yellow. This is like a canary yellow velvet sofa that we have, and it's the only piece in the room which is otherwise neutral, but it's just enough color that it still brings vibrancy and life to the space.
But they all share a hue, the
Mm-hmm.
same hue to complement each other.
Yeah, 100%.
Is your house ever messy?
And no, it's so
Never.
funny. I actually love that question because I get that sometimes. I mean, she knows. I don't have to lie up here. She knows. Like, we have a small dog. There's accidents all the time. I wear my shoes. It kills people, but I wear my shoes in every single room. My husband over there wears them on the bed sometimes. That's a different story. But I love, like, I want my room to be, or my home to be beautiful, but I never want it to be perceived as a showroom, right? So I'm even intentional with, like, the fabrics that we use are all, like, performance fabrics. I have a lot of jute and sisal rugs. Yeah. I mean, we're
Still
two guys. Like,
livable.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, she's like, don't look at the kitchen. Yeah, it can be messy. But it's livable. Again, so in my artwork series, so this is called Bibliothèque. So this is a series I started years ago where I take antique documents from the 17th and 18th century, and I apply different collage work and abstracts. And every series that I release, there's usually like a dedicated color palette. So again, like this was one that I wanted to incorporate more like saffron tones and oxblood red. And you can see, like, even here, my approach is a very similar approach to a room where it's just suggested enough that you can kind of get the overall feeling for that being injected into a neutral palette, but it's not overwhelming or overtakes the whole thing. Our next chapter, our next part is texture. This is one of my favorites. So I've always been someone that when I walk into a room, I notice my eyes are constantly scanning and analyzing, and it doesn't even necessarily mean like towards the objects, but I'm more so taking in what is the materiality, what is the makeup of everything that I'm looking at. Like, I always like to see if like there's a textural story being told. And again, going back to palette, as someone who works a lot with neutrals, like for me, I've always found that I need to lean on texture to help add depth and to help add layers into a space. And this is where there's so much for me, like intention with what it is that I'm choosing to add into a room or even on the canvas. Yeah, so there, perfect timing. So there's every abstract piece of mine that I start, like there's a thick base layer of gesso and plaster. It just through experimenting, that was kind of my thing, and I build onto that. And I like similar to like my rooms, when you're stepping back and you're viewing a room or you're viewing a piece of mine, you're able to understand that there's a lot of different layers there and textural qualities that just overall kind of provide visual interest. Like that. And that.
And too, like having the texture elements that you add in where light hits it, it almost takes on a new life. Like some of the ones over there you can
Yeah, which
see
are
in the
just-
corner. Yeah.
Like there's only like two tones in that, but again, because I'm doing that and because it's so stripped down, I really have to find that emphasis on texture to help really bring the pieces to life.
So another question we got from his followers was, how do I mix antiques with new and modern pieces?
So if you know me, you know I love antiques. But I've always done this mental checklist when I'm sourcing for a room or for a home. And there's no like perfect ratio, there's no perfect science, but I'm always conscious of not adding too many new pieces into a room that it starts to feel like a showroom. And on the other extreme, I'm also cognizant of not adding too many antique pieces that it's like, Mrs. Havisham's dining room. And just like, shout out the Great Expectations, and it's like too stuffy. So it's always like this give and take. And I'll talk about that in other chapters, right? And that's part of like the editing process. But when I source for a room, like say it's a living room, I find myself, if I stumble upon the perfect coffee table and it's a newer piece, I instantly like switch into, then the rug that's underneath has to be a vintage piece, or the side chair next to it needs to be a vintage piece. It's all about creating like that juxtaposition and just the right amount of tension in a room that then everything seems to have the ability to have its own moment.
Like in here, I've always loved that chest in this room. It's a beautiful antique piece, but then pairing that with that more sleek and modern lamps adds another textural quality. You have so much texture from like an antique piece of furniture, and then layering that then with something newer, sleek and shiny, it kind of brings in another element too. And I've
Yeah.
always found he does that so well.
And for me, and from the design standpoint, I mean, I know so many other designers that do this, but like you have your go-to textures. Like I said, I'm someone that loves like natural fibers, right? That's executed through the rug itself or the basket. I love Belgian linen. That's always my go-to. That's in my curtains and in my pillows. Texturally, you have like those go-to things, and it's more so, at least for me, it was recognizing what are those elements that I love incorporating and that I can keep using in other spaces of mine, again, to kind of create that cohesive through line throughout the rooms. On the left, that's a little corner of the kitchen at Sycamore House. So the home was built in 1780, and all of it is intact and original, for the exception of this kitchen, which was an addition in the early 2000s. And it was actually the first room I walked in when touring the property, and the thing I fell in love with instantly was the original Quaker fieldstone facade. That's actually the original facade of the house, and that acts as a wall, and obviously it's just like this beautiful textural, like visually stimulating thing that when we were designing, we custom designed the cabinetry. I really wanted to like pare that back and make that very simplistic with like shaker cabinets and very sleek handles. Like, again, nothing to rival the beauty of the wall itself, but that would just allow that to have its own moment. And then to the right, this is just another studio of mine that was in Chicago. Again, just kind of showing you my textural go-tos and how I love just playing with something that's sleek and rough or refined and rugged. Form. So I always say, like, I have this obsession with this sense of fragility. In working with Williams Sonoma on my product collaborations, like, we'll go through these sampling processes, and I'll meet with the design team, and we'll look at the objects, and I'm always coming back like, make it more fragile. And I don't necessarily always literally mean like have it be breakable, but there's something for me that's beautiful with thin lines and a delicate nature. So whether that's like taking in the width of a legs on a table or a chair, or if it's a vase, like making the curvature a lot more delicate and flowing. Every time I'm curating and sourcing pieces for a room, I treat, no matter if it's a large sofa or if it's like a small little decorative object, like, to me they just have as much importance in the final composition. And again, for me as an artist, like, it's a very similar process to when I'm painting.
Even down to the details, like he said. Don't just think of your furniture pieces or the legs of your tables. Even this, the pottery that he uses throughout their homes, and the lines in it are everything so like specifically chosen for the space.
This is my husband's pottery, Ignacio. He has a pottery line, and the reason why I love it too, again, he has a neutral stripped down palette to it, but again, his line work and his form, there's something very delicate about the pieces, and I just love incorporating them within the home itself. New collection dropping Monday. These are pieces that I did with Williams Sonoma in this last collab. This was back in October, but again, there was art. I love Art Nouveau references, and we were talking about like doing miniature lamps and andirons, and I really wanted to play with like the movement of the legs and having them, instead of just being very plain, bases or geometric type I wanted to play with form and have the pieces feel like they were almost like dancing. And there's so many pieces throughout both homes, if you look at the furniture, like that this is mimicked throughout. This is our primary in DC. This is like a crowd favorite. People love this room, but there really isn't much to the space itself. It's actually one of the more like minimalist rooms in the house. But again, I love making the eye travel when you walk into a space. So again, a very pared back palette throughout, but I wanted to play, I love 4-poster beds, and I love this one too because of just how fragile and delicate those lines were. And I just find, like, when you look at this, we were intentional with making sure there were black frames behind it that mirrored the front of the bed, and even how your eyes then drawn down into the legs of the bench. I always find, like, marrying contrast with form has been like kind of that sweet spot for me. And it's also just it's having fun with shapes and forms. Like even the I love Cooley and Empire lampshades, right? And just adding in those next to the bed, flanking them, it just becomes playful. I would say like it's like shape shifting the space.
So another question, which you touched on a little bit with the Art Nouveau, but which design periods do you normally gravitate towards?
I find I love all periods. I love Art Deco for the geometric qualities in it. As I mentioned, I love Art Nouveau because of its free flowing, it was inspired by nature, so there's something organic about it. And I love incorporating like colonial pieces because they're more pragmatic and structured. I was talking to someone upstairs, but it's so true. It's like, for me, what creates timeless and classic design, I can't tell you how many, my husband knows, but how many design books I have. I mean, here's some, but the classics are some of them are over 35, they're older than me, they're very old, but I'll flip through them and I'm like, they're applicable to today. And the reason why I think that they're applicable is they're designers that understand like incorporating that mix of the various different pieces and doing it so intentionally. There really is no timestamp. I can't tell you how many times I get publishers or publications will reach out like, hey, can we do a trend piece with you? And I always kindly refuse to do it because I've never been one to buy into completely saturating a room or a home in the latest trend, right? It's only a matter of time till that feels dated. So to that question, there are so many different periods that I've gravitated to and that I include in my home. And here again, just examples like this Art Nouveau chair, more of like an Art Deco entryway table. And I usually, like I said, similar to like the bed, wherever I have very fun movement in a piece, I'm usually focused on contrast and making sure that those are darker tones, specifically if it's in an all-neutral room.
And I think incorporating different periods is kind of freeing in a way, because a lot of times I think like, oh, I love this period, but I don't think I can mix it with this other one. But hearing you say that and seeing how it's done, kind of approaching that more classic and timeless look, I think is super achievable by mixing all of them.
We were laughing earlier today. These were the chairs from hell. This is at Sycamore House. This is the dining room, and again, going back to palette, you'll see how I brought that yellow into that room too, but I wanted this to be the palette cleanser of the home, truly like the only all-white room, and in doing so, I knew I wanted the backs of whatever chairs that I were to use to be kind of like the
Statement.
Yeah, the statement piece within the room itself. So we finally landed on these Chippendale ladder backs. I just loved the movement. I loved how they just felt feminine in a way, and we did these I designed these like custom skirts to be upholstered onto them, and there's just like this free-flowing nature to the chair itself. Truly, if you go into our basement at Sycamore House, it's like we joke all the time, but it's true. We're like, we need a yard sale. There's probably like 7 sets of chairs down there, just like lined. It looks like a car dealership of chairs, but we landed on these. And I think too, like, not to go too off topic, but like setting is. And I write about this in the book, but setting is huge for me. So like, for me, these were much more like, specifically with the skirts, were more romantic and free-flowing, and like that's not necessarily something I would probably include into the townhouse, which is more of obviously a city setting, but I was able to kind of pull it off given that this was in the country. So always being mindful of like that setting. And then just really a simple, I wanted to choose this because it wasn't too heavily layered, but this is again part where I take antique plates from the 1800s and I do this abstract work and just doing simple black geometric collage work on top of the piece, your eyes constantly moving, only by using simple squares and rectangles and layers.
Your specialty.
So one compliment, which I'll take, that I get sometimes is, how am I able to make a space feel so collected and layered without it becoming too overwhelming? That for me has always been, again, key on sticking with a very strict palette, specifically with neutrals, but it's also a game of like give and take. So I find that whenever I'm putting together a room, and I am someone that loves for a home to feel collected, a home that feels lived in. You know, if there's a set vignette, let's say of like it's a chest of drawers with a mirror with lamps and picture frames layered on top of it, I'm always conscious then anything nearby that to allow that negative space to live so that said, you know, vignette can have a breathable moment. I mean, yeah, at Sycamore House, this is one of the layers that I do, but it just adds visual interest. And again, it's similar to my approach on the canvas in this studio. And I think it's truly a game of editing, right? So I always find like when I'm putting together a room, I will incorporate everything that I think should be within the space, and I'll allow myself time to kind of walk away from it. And sometimes I add, most times I take away. But it's really finding what are the like shining objects in the room itself, and how do I want them to stand out, or how do I want to accentuate them by layering in front of them. So, water break. I added in, we took thousands of images for the book, and I included this one. It's really random. It's not even really like the best representation of layers, but it's funny because Doug, our book designer, this was his favorite image of anything we captured, and he actually included it towards the beginning of the book. But he loved just how like honest and layered it was, and truly like our homes typically will be a little bit messy, to answer your question, like this, although this was styled.
Transparency.
Yeah, this is styled. So like just like maybe like a Coke Zero can in the background or something, but again, really, if you look at this image, it's a very small space, and if you were to, you know, create a category of everything that you see, there's a lot of objects in this vignette itself, but at least for me, it doesn't feel overwhelming, because again, I'm really conscious of the tones and the palette that I'm using, and I'm also aware, like, you know, for example, similar to a piece of my art, if the foreground is very heavy, I want to make sure anything behind that, like for example on like the staircase itself, I left completely blank, and then allowed then a gallery wall to live beyond that. Just having those breakups in between the layers really help everything then have like this cohesive harmony.
And I know you talk to a lot about scale, so you have that large scale portrait, and then the items that you layered underneath are a little bit smaller, but also still have their moment within that.
Yeah, and I think I do that. Like, as I mentioned, when I'm putting a room together, I'm really like, what are the star pieces in here? What are the gems in here? And is that something that I should go from like more of a minimalist standpoint? Is that something that should be like a standalone and have its own moment? Or is that a piece that actually needs to be accentuated with other pieces in front of it? Again, with my abstract work, every piece that I do, there's usually like 7 or 8 layers of whether it's gesso or texture in different pigments. And even like on this piece here, I do this thing where I'll take like my palette knife and just drench it in paint. And going against then the plaster itself, there's these added layers. And again, for me, similar to like how you dress, right? Like I love layers. It just adds that visual, textural interest to the final product.
So another big question, Sycamore House, which is their home in the country. How do you balance historic with contemporary elements at Sycamore House?
Yeah. This was one that was difficult because this was a unique property for us because, again, it was from 1780. If you know me, like I love history and I love historic properties, and this was the first property that we had that was like truly just everything was intact. And the previous owner, no shade, she does follow me. Maybe she's watching. We loved it. We loved it. But she really loved that colonial period. So she was really, you know, literal with the colors of the rooms and the pieces that were featured throughout it. And I love that. And I think, again, it's really about to each his own. There's no right or wrong. But for me, I wanted the space still to feel current and modern while still, you know, being mindful of incorporating colonial or period pieces that were appropriate to the home. but just doing it in very like suggested areas or manners.
Paying homage, but not.
100%. And again, like this is just a quick little example, but this is the back of the house, and you know, just approaching outdoor living space similar to how I would approach a room indoors, and just how I love to layer in, whether it be like antique pieces like this urn in front of these two sofas and the pillows, and how that then flows into the dining area. You know, outdoor spaces can feel lived in and collected as well. Again, just kind of an example of give and take. You know, you can't really see here, but this is the main staircase, and there's this gallery wall that completely wraps up 2 to 3 flights of stairs. And in doing so, because when you walk in, there's obviously so much visual noise there, I wanted to make sure that anything just outside of that frame, like here and beyond into the dining room, acted more as like negative space and a palate cleanser for you to kind of digest that without being too overwhelmed.
Using just a singular portrait there as opposed to continuing the gallery wall and kind of feeling overwhelmed by it when you walk in.
Yeah, just being intentional with it too. Quick snapshots of 2 studios of mine. Again, we had included these in the book just because even as I work, I've just always been someone to like layer things around me. And the last chapter and the last element, this was one that was controversial, was titled Nostalgia. And this was one that my literary agent, my editor, were like, okay, how's that a design principle? And again, we were practicing earlier today, and I'm like, I wrote a whole chapter about it, but it's really hard for me to articulate it because for me, any room, if you visited my homes, or if you're familiar with my work, and I use a lot of like historic papers and stuff, like I always want this historic nature to come through and this sense of warmth, no matter what room you're entering, or this sense of like
That
escapism, or I always say like magic, but it's not like in a tacky or cliche way, but I just like I love for there to be this sense of like, have I been here before, or is this from like yesteryear, or conjuring up a feeling almost like when you watch an old movie that you love, or you hear a song that you just creating that overall good vibe.
Yeah.
So, for example, like for me, and again, this is such a personal chapter, but like this is a guest room at the townhouse, and I when I was just beginning to design the space itself, I was watching a favorite movie of mine. It's called W.E., Wallace and Edward. If you know me, you know I'm obsessed with Wallace Simpson, and her photos like are all over our homes. And in the movie itself, you know, they're hopping from hotel to hotel in London and Paris, and they're in these beautiful rooms with canopy beds, and you know the lamps peeking through. And I kind of wanted to create that for myself, but again, just being a little bit more modern and intentional with the specific pieces I was using, the palette, the type of fabric and patterns I was using. And this is so, yeah, my photographer, when we were shooting this chapter, she was taking a lunch break, and we were trying to figure out like what to shoot next. And I've always been someone to collect old vintage photos. If you go into any of our living rooms, you'll see like we have like silver trays, and they're filled with black and white photographs. I'm not related to anyone here. All strangers, doesn't freak me out. But there's something I love about the storytelling component of them. And in Sycamore House, like it was really important for me. That project was crazy. We literally purchased the home, and within 8 months we had to begin shooting it for this book. So I really wanted this house to feel like lived in and heritage-like, almost as if like it was passed down to me, which it wasn't. But it wasn't. So in all of the rooms we added just simple framed photographs from this series here, and I can't tell you how many people have walked through the property and they're like, was this a family home, or is like, were you related to these people, or, but it's just stupid things like that I love adding into a space. A funny thing too that people always comment about is if they're like little Easter eggs now, but I'll add in vintage telephones into a room by a bedside or near a console table. They're not functional, they're not working, but yeah, they're just like fun little nostalgic things that I like.
And like evoke memories and feelings for people.
100%.
So another question, how are you able to use vintage and antique pieces without your home feeling dated and stuffy?
Yeah, so again, I think this goes back into just, for me, it's always been about creating that mental checkoff list, right? Making sure that I'm not incorporating too many new pieces that it feels too sterile or like a showroom, and not too many antiques that it then becomes dated or over elaborate. It's really about that fine dance. Up there's like a little phone that I was saying, like non-functional, but I just love it. And then those are actually the only family photographs I have in the house. That's like a old black and white photo of my late grandfather, and then one of my mom and her sisters.
I think the photo on the left, that chair is like the perfect representation of bringing in an antique without it feeling old by adding that,
Yeah.
the textile.
So just like this is one of like 8 of the chairs that we tried out for the dining room. So I'm like, I gotta use it somewhere. Old Swedish Gustavian chair that I then just wanted to do like a simple black and white upholstery to it, just to bring it some
New
life
life
and make it
into
feel
it.
modern. Yeah.
Can I just ask,
Yeah, go for it. Tell me.
with finding antique pieces or vintage pieces, do you paint, like,
The furniture itself, I mean, it depends. I'm more of a purist. I'll either like have it completely restored or leave it as is, but I've always been someone like, I love patina on things. So the more wear, the more tear, the more it feels like it's seen some years. I usually like to just leave it as is, and again, just like juxtaposing that then if there's an opportunity to upholster something on it with something newer. But I know many people who paint furniture, and it's beautiful.
yeah, you had a chest in one of your first pictures of your Chicago
Mm-hmm.
that looked very
Weathered.
weathered.
Yeah.
Did you do that, or did
No,
you
that's
buy
how I
it?
found it. But you know what's so funny you say that? Yeah, that.
I love
No, well, I found that, but if you saw towards the beginning, I have that same chest in my studio now, but I painted it, and it's actually
People
I
are
never
dying
paint it. I'm a
inside.
purist, yeah, but that's actually probably the only piece I've ever painted, and the only reason why I did that was because of the wood tone just wasn't working with the floors at the time in the studio, but I found it that way. It killed me to paint it, but I needed to paint it.
Balance.
A butler's pantry at Sycamore House. Again, I love collecting old silver, but I'm really intentional with not finding or incorporating things that are almost too decorative or too elaborate, right? Again, just trying to be a little bit more streamlined with things. But when you walk in here, it just feels like almost like a little like modern Downton Abbey vibe. Same thing with the kitchen. Just, whether it be the hanging copper pots and pans, just being intentional in little areas here and there to just kind of, like I said, like have little old school moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just in closing, I mean, I hope that this was informative. I hope it was inspiring. A lot of what the book talks about is just really being intentional with what it is that you are working on, no matter what your creative field is or what your creative interest is. And how, for me, in so many ways, establishing that and creating a recognizable creative point of view was really stepping back and understanding what are my core principles, and that I return to time and time again, both on and off the canvas. So I appreciate you for hanging in there. I'm glad I got to show you my trip to the Great Wall. And we'll do now a Q&A.
And we do have someone walking around with a microphone too.
Thank you.
So if you'll just raise your hand, yeah.
And please hold the microphone very close to you so that everyone on Zoom can also hear your questions. That would be really great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. This was really informative. I'm curious, you talked about the photos of the random people that you've collected over the years, but for personal effects, other than the 2 that you demonstrated, but current photographs or things that have been gifted that maybe don't fit in with your exact style or have a sentimental value, how do you incorporate them into the larger piece?
Yeah, I hope I can answer this. I think for me, again, there's rooms in the townhouse and Sycamore House that haven't even been shown yet, but we do have like a lot of personal items. But for example, you know, we have photo albums on our coffee table that show us when we were in high school and when we first met. I don't necessarily have to have them framed and up on a wall, because for me that may be a bit jarring to see amongst everything else, but they're still somehow incorporated throughout. I'm always big on, you know, whether it's through travels or whether it's through different periods in our stages in our life, like making sure I'm incorporating pieces within a room that tell a story to me, right? That I can kind of look at, and it's kind of like a quick reference point. And it's also a great conversation starter whenever hosting or entertaining people.
Awesome. Thank
Did
you.
that answer that?
Yeah,
She's like my
and
interpreter.
in trays,
I'm like, did that answer?
trays and baskets will have like loose photos around. So like you said, not necessarily framed, but they're still around the house.
Yeah,
you
or
can see.
even like we have like a small like gallery wall at the townhouse, and you know, it's black and white, so it kind of blends in, but it's a stupid like photograph I took, I think with like my iPhone at the time, of my roommate Livia. She's a best friend of mine, and it's just kind of like snuck into there, but it kind of blends in. But for me, again, it's, you know, meaningful and personal.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So my question is, as a pretty young designer, kind of who feels like they're living in like the world of Instagram and TikTok, where it feels very oversaturated, and maybe a world where everyone and their mother thinks that they're a designer. Kind of what is your advice to someone trying to set themselves apart? Maybe
Yeah.
just some advice on how to maybe stand out, or just kind of what makes a designer stand out to you?
Sure. My personal take on that is storytelling, right? Being really intentional with what it is that you share. I mean, it always surprises people. My agent was always like, really? I'm like, I may go a week or plus without even posting, because I don't really have anything to share. There's not something I'm trying to convey. There's not something I'm trying to tell. But I really think it's honing in on what is your message? What is it that you're trying to come across? And again, as an artist, right, like that's usually through my work on the canvas. But for designers, you know, that's through the spaces that you create. I think through social media, like a big thing for me, and I've been doing it lately, but it's like creating these like carousels with music that I feel like are very much like
Draws emotion.
yeah,
within
just
it, too.
and that there's as you're flipping through that curation of images, again, they're somehow, without being literal with words, like my captions are usually very short, but you're getting a quick understanding of what the whole entirety of that story is. And so many people do it really well, but I think it's just being cognizant of that. Like, to your point, we live in a time and an age, it's actually why I wrote the book. A huge reason why I wrote the book, because so much of what it is that we produce right now is in a digital form, right? And it's not tangible. And that kind of like freaked me out, that I was creating all of this imagery or like making these homes, and I wasn't really capturing that in something that I could hold. But we digest so much on a daily basis that things get lost. Mm-hmm. So in order for me, I think, again, for me, to really make something that I'm sharing stand out, there has to be that storytelling component.
So at some point in the earlier part of your book, you talk about a collected home, and that I saw a lot of objects, footed bowls. You like footed bowls. And you talked about textiles and colors and textures. So are you always collecting? Are you
Yeah.
always looking? Are you always sourcing?
Yeah.
And then probably curating and editing, like something that you liked 5 years ago, that color's no longer going to work. Yeah, okay. So can you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm always someone that's on the hunt, and I love that, right? Like that magic of when you come across something that just speaks to you, and it's like, I have no idea where I'm going to put this, but we're buying it. I love that. And yeah, it can become too much, like she knows
We
better
hold on
than
to things.
Yes, and there are closets that no one's allowed into, and I need to purge.
Invite us to your sale.
All right. All right. But no, I like that. I think as of late I've been a little bit more disciplined. Where was I just at? Oh, we were in Philly. But we were outside of Philadelphia for a family reunion just this past weekend, and we were doing these antique barns, and I had like 8 things in my hands. And towards the end, I'm like, you know what? I got to put this back. It's just like everything that I had in my hand, I'm like, I love it. Speaks to me. I don't have a place for it. So that's something that I'm trying to practice more. Because I love objects. I've always been someone, as I said in the book, I grew up outside of an antique auction house in Pennsylvania. That was literally my backyard. So at a very, very early age, like the art of collecting, and my parents did it too, layering a home with antiques and pieces that just speak to you, it was kind of like in my blood. Yeah, hope that answers your question.
You had a photograph. I don't think you could go back, but you had a photograph of your husband's pottery,
Yeah.
and it was sitting on a marble piece with curved edges. Was that a mantle? Can I have it?
It was a mantle, and she's a friend of mine. Her name's Molly. She actually runs a firm called DC Mantle House, and she does amazing work. She'll salvage like those 2 Italianate mantles that you see in my home. We brought those in, and she's awesome. Total plug to her, and she found those for us. But in that photo, just like again, that goes back into the chapter on form. I loved how his pieces kind of mimicked the movement that was on that top shelf of that mantle. So that's cool that you noticed that.
We have a question from Zoom. Someone would like to know, when you're working with a blank room, where do you like to start?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, I mean, for me, it depends. Like, what is it? A bedroom? Is it a living room? But I usually say, like, for me, it's the first thing I do. It's foundational, and it's why it was the first chapter. It's understanding like what palette do I want to start with, right? Like what colors do I want the wall? Is the wood tone of the floor correct? Like what type of rug? It's almost like building that base and then layering on top of that. But that was a similar process that I did with Sycamore House, right? Like I literally went room by room by room before we even were entertaining the pieces that were involved. I really wanted to understand what the progression of the pattern of the palette would be within that space, and that's something that it drives most people crazy, but like I love doing that sampling process.
She's coming around.
All right. Hey, thanks. Great talk. I really enjoyed it. So, with your country house in Middleburg, is there some you're thinking about? I'm in Middleburg. This is sort of the midpoint, Washington to where it was Winchester, and the historical importance of that.
Yeah, meaning of like setting, right?
Setting and the
Totally.
geography.
Totally.
How does that, would you say, influence your design decisions or choices?
Well, and again, there's nods to it within the home. Like I do not horseback ride, right? We get asked all the time. People are like, "Are you into horses?" I'm like, "Not really. I just like the vibe out here."
But you're a farmer.
Yeah. But we have like English riding hats just sitting on little bookshelves, or we'll have in that dining room. There are a pair of English riding boots right by the door. It almost like props it open. So there are subtle, like again, nothing too literal. But to that point, like, and I write about this, like setting is huge for me. Like even our apartment in Chicago, there was much more like Art Deco references within the space. It's just a personal preference. For me, when you walk into a home, for me, it's like out of place if I'm using like coastal elements within the city, right? Like I think that you can totally have like suggested little things within, but yeah, I'm always pretty aware of what a home setting is and how I can kind of honor that in a way.
And Middleburg was mostly sort of equestrian or horse country.
Equestrian, kind of like
hunting.
old Americana vibes. For
Also
me,
nods to PA.
yeah. I mean, growing up in Pennsylvania, like Quaker Fieldstone farm homes like that. They scattered the landscape right throughout Bucks County and Montgomery County. So for me, that home was really nostalgic, and specifically homes from the late 1700s, and again that kind of early Americana style. And there's many colonial pieces throughout that home too.
Well, we're looking forward to the invite.
Totally.
It's brilliant. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Hi. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
So my question is, do you actually have any interior design faux pas that you can't help but kind of love, like a Ray Dunn mug, something?
Oh my God, I feel like I do. Trying to think.
I know.
I definitely do. Just I gotta think of what they may be. Oh man.
I don't know.
People are generally nice on Instagram. I'm sure they're thinking it, but they're not maybe writing it or commenting on it. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm stumped there. But to be honest, I know I do because I've caught myself in moments where I'm like, screw it. I'm using it anyways. I don't care. I like it. But
People say you use a lot of baskets.
yeah, but I don't know. Is that a
It's
photo?
not wrong.
It's true. Actually,
It's not wrong when he does it.
No, it's true. I have a friend Taylor. She literally calls me basket case because I love baskets. And my husband sometimes like, okay, we get it. Maybe it's a reference. My grandmother was like a Lagenberger basket collector, so maybe it rubbed off. But yeah, that could be it. Yeah. So.
Let's give a round of applause for
Thanks,
Josh.
Sarah. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Please join us in the lobby for a book signing.